Good morning. So glad you're here at the Cove. Before we jump into our sermon, just want to get you updated on our Columbia team that is in Columbia now. They're coming back tomorrow. Was texting with Elliot this morning. They are actually going to visit a church this morning that originally was started in the jungles of Columbia with about 50 people. And some guerrillas had come into that camp and gave the people three choices: renounce Jesus, leave, or the next morning when the guerrillas came back, they would all be slaughtered. And so these 50 Christians, they gathered up all their belongings and left and went to Bogota, and that is where Elliot is going to be taking the team to worship with about 500 Christians. And so we just do not understand that type of Christianity here in America. We're not faced with those kinds of choices. But that's where they're going this morning. They've had a great and a successful mission project, and they will be coming back tomorrow, so please keep them in your prayers. Our sermon series is on courageous living, living in the promises of God, and we're going through the book of Joshua at the same time. And today we're talking about recommitting. On June 3rd, 1989 was the day, it was a Saturday morning, Susie and I decided to say I do and become husband and wife 30 years ago. Now that particular day, there was it was a beautiful day, but nothing compared to what Susie was. And she's become even a more beautiful person over the last 30 years, if that were humanly possible. But she's demonstrated that. But that particular day was a blur in a lot of ways. Now, I do remember her walking down the aisle of that church in Newport Richey, but the rest of the service was like I said, kind of a blur. I knew there was things that we were supposed to say. There was people that we were supposed to talk to. There was food to eat. There was a honeymoon to get started. And trust me, I was really excited about that because Susie and I waited until we were married to start the honeymoon, if you know what I mean, but that's a whole different subject. But the fact of the matter is, when she walked forward and we said our vows, but I'll be honest, at age 22, I didn't give any thought to the vows. We didn't write our own. I knew that we were just going to have to repeat phrases, and I spoke for a living, so how difficult was that going to be? And at age 22, do you really understand, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and health, forsaking all others? I just don't know that I really understood all of what that meant compared to what I understand today at age 52. Well, about the 7-year mark, we've been married probably 6 or 7 years, Susie started talking about renewing our vows and wanting to renew our vows at some particular time in our life. And I'm like, man, that has just got to be one of the dumbest things I have heard. And I just poo-pooed the idea. And it was just too sappy for me. I just didn't like it. Just thought it was dumb. I already said it once. It was fine. It took, just didn't understand. Why do I have to go through that again? So for the next several years, every once in a while, she would mention it. And every time was the same reaction. I just poo-pooed it. So about year 20, being married 20 years, she went dark. Now, that's not that she went to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and started threatening me to do it. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about she just stopped talking about it. And so when anniversary 25 came around, I decided to surprise her. So I called all the family members, those that were in town and those that were out of state, had them all gather and come right here into the auditorium that night, June 3rd. And had them parked on the north side of the building, because when Susie rides in a car or drives, she kind of drives like this. So I knew if I parked over there, she wouldn't see anybody parked on this side. So we left for dinner from the house, and I said, listen, I need to stop by the church for a couple things before we go to dinner. She says, okay. And listen, the surprise thing is a big deal in my house because we've got some family members that don't keep surprises. So this was a big surprise. So we walked in on the office side. I went to the office. I had a bouquet of flowers for Susie, and I had a headpiece made of flowers, very delicate, put it on her head, and she started crying. I knew, man, this is going to be a grand slam. This is just good. Talk about honeymoon. Rekindle that. So she, got that on, and I said, okay, let's come into the auditorium. So we walked through that side door right there, and music was playing. And as soon as she walked through the door, she thought we just walked in on a service. because there was people here and there was music playing, and her eyes got about as big around as saucers. But then she looked at the people and discovered one by one, she knew everybody was here, and she just lit up like a Christmas tree, like on Christmas morning. And so we walked down the aisle, and Jim Jacobs was here, a good minister friend, and he renewed our vows. But before the vow renewal happened, I took a couple minutes to talk to Susie and talk to the rest of the family. And it was from deep from within my heart. And I said some things like this. I said, we look like we have a great marriage, and we do, and we look like we've got it all together, and most times we do, but there's been times in our marriage that have been tough, difficult times, challenging times. And most of those challenging times was because of me. Me being selfish, me being immature, me not dying to myself. Now I understand what these vows mean. I have a better understanding after 25 years of what they mean. And so when I renew these vows, I am renewing to die to myself, and I'm going to make the rest of the years that we have the best years. And I said some other sappy stuff, but it was good. So then we said, the vows again. And you know what? In all honesty, the last 5 years have been the best of years because I've been dying to myself. And so that recommitment to what I really didn't understand the first time around when I said it has made a huge difference in our marriage and in our life together. And maybe you've experienced recommitment of some sort in your own life. Now, when we recommit to something, what that usually means is we have an original commitment. I mean, it's hard to recommit if you haven't committed to begin with. And oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes that recommitment means we're doing that because we lost our focus. Maybe we lost our focus with a person or a responsibility or a role or a job that we had. And so we decided to step back up and maybe even make the original commitment even much better. Maybe you've experienced this with your career. Maybe you decided to leave the workforce for a while, maybe be a stay-at-home mom, maybe homeschool kids, and then it was time to go back into the workforce. And so you had to recommit to going back to work and getting involved in a vocation. Maybe you experienced this with your family, a particular family member, a spouse, a child, a grandchild, maybe that strange and crazy uncle who needed you. You stepped up when no one else would. Well, maybe you experienced a recommitment to yourself in some way. There's lots of ways that we do that, whether it's getting back on the treadmill and getting back in the exercise routine, or starting yoga, or eating better, or stop spending money that you don't have, or getting out of debt, or going back and getting your education and finishing your degree. There's a lot of ways that we can recommit to ourselves. Maybe you've experienced a recommitment to your church. Maybe there was a time that you walked away from the church, that you didn't attend church on a regular basis. But now you're back. You got reconnected with a group of people. You started back in a life group, and you've got a mentor, or maybe you're mentoring someone to be a better disciple. Maybe you had a time in your life when you walked away from Christ, when you weren't growing. When you decided, you know what, I've got too many questions, I've got too many doubts. God didn't show up when I prayed. He didn't meet my expectations, and so maybe for a time you walked away, but now you're back, you're growing, and you're strong, and you're worshiping, and you're serving, and you're loving His people in a way that maybe you didn't have that appreciation before. Maybe the circumstances that you experienced made you quit, made you walk away. Maybe the environment was just too hot, so you got out of the proverbial kitchen for a while, and that usually means you go to the School of Hard Knocks, and having been a graduate from the School of Hard Knocks, and graduating at the top of my class, by the way, I can tell you that that school has no playground. That school has no recess time. It is just hard lessons after hard lessons. Maybe you experienced too many disappointments. But then you woke up. Then you realized, you know what? It's not so good being alone. Maybe you realized that you had a desire for sweet fellowship, that you needed other people around you. Maybe you realized, you know what? God really didn't disappoint you at all. Maybe you disappointed yourself. Maybe you realized that it was not your boss's fault completely, that maybe you had some responsibility in that. Maybe you came to the understanding that, without any accountability, there's no guardrails, there's no safety rails, and that you need accountability in your life. Whatever your personal circumstances were when you recommitted, you probably got involved in recommitting yourself to responsibilities or a person or a task or a purpose. Well, today as we continue our sermon series in Joshua, we're looking at a time when Joshua led the people to recommit. He led the whole nation of Israel in a type of recommitment service. They had just won 2 battles. They've won the battle with Jericho. They've taken the city of Ai, but they've got 29 more cities, 29 more kings that they're going to defeat. And so Joshua thought that this would be a really good time to bring the people back together and get focused on God. And we read about that in Joshua chapter 8. At that time, Joshua built an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, on Mount Ebal, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the people of Israel, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of uncut stones upon which no man has wielded an iron tool. And they offered on it burnt offerings to the Lord and sacrificed peace offerings. And there in the presence of the people of Israel, he wrote on the stones a copy of the law of Moses, which he had written. And all Israel, sojourner as well as native born, with their elders and officers and their judges, stood on opposite sides of the ark before the Levitical priests who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord, half of them in front of Mount Gerizim and half of them in front of Mount Ebal, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded at the first, to bless the people of Israel. And afterwards he read all the words of the law, the blessing and the curse. According to all that is written in the book of the law, there was not a word of all that Moses commanded that Joshua did not read before all the assembly of Israel, and the women and the little ones and the sojourners who lived among them. So let's talk a little bit about this before we get into this. There's 2 mountains, Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. At the tops, you can see much of the promised land on top of either one of those. At the tops of these 2 mountains, the tops are separated by about 1.5 miles. But at the bottoms, they're only separated by 5 football fields, 500 yards. And so both, as a matter of fact, Gerizim and Ebal both mean the same thing, barren. But as Joshua's on one side of the mountain, these mountains form like an amphitheater. And so without a sound system, Joshua's voice could be heard with people that are on Mount Ebal or down in the valley or Mount Gerizim. So he was able to give instruction to all of the people just on the side of this one mountain. Now it's interesting that God had commanded Moses to set up Mount Gerizim as a mount of blessing and Mount Ebal as the mount of curse. It's almost like there's an imaginary line that's drawn. One side is the blessing, one side is the curse, and the people had a choice of what they wanted, whether they were going to live a life of blessing or whether they were going to live a life that involved all those curses. Now, if my family would have been on Mount Ebal, I would have visited some friends on Mount Gerizim because I wouldn't want anything to do with the curses that are in the Bible. I don't know whether you've read those or not, but they are some serious stuff. I don't want anything to do with that. But what happens is we invite those blessings or those curses in our own lives even today, whether we choose to obey God and receive the blessing or whether we choose to disobey God and receive the curse. Now it's interesting when Joshua set this altar up that he set the altar up not on Mount Gerizim, the mount of blessing. He set the altar up on Mount Ebal, which was the mount of warning, the mount of curses. Why did God do that? Well, God, I think, was teaching a much greater point. And that greater point is, listen, you're not going to be able to be good enough. You're not going to be able to obey the law enough to get to me. You're going to have to get to me a different way. And we've demonstrated that in our own lives. We haven't kept the law. We've sinned. We sinned maybe even this morning. We've sinned this week, this past week. We'll sin again this coming week. And so God's point was he was making a way through sacrifice to get to him. And ultimately, we know the ultimate sacrifice and the way that we get to God is through Jesus Christ and the sacrifice that he made. He lived a perfect life. And I think that's Joshua's point, is to help the people get refocused on God and what his word and what his will and what his ways were. See, there's some important lessons that we can glean from this experience from Joshua and the Israelite people. The first one is this. Salvation doesn't come from recommitment. It comes from living our lives dedicated to our spiritual priority, and that is Jesus. You can recommit every single day. You can recommit every single hour. That's not what saves you. What saves us is Jesus Christ. Now, for Joshua and the people of Israel, that was the law of Moses. And that was the sacrificial system. And so he was laying out all the law of Moses, and he laid it out to strangers and foreigners, the sojourners, which would have included Rahab and her family, which have been outside the camp of Israel all this time. And this is probably when they became a part of the nation of Israel, because now they know what all the law of Moses entails. Joshua didn't leave a single point out. He said it all. He wrote it all down. And so that's probably when they became a part of the family. But it was about God. It wasn't about the recommitment. It was about God. And the same is true with you and me. It's not about recommitting ourselves to Christ. That's not where salvation lies. Salvation lies in Jesus Christ. Now, in 2019, there's been estimates that there's been 107 billion people who have lived. 107 billion. Now, being that there's 7 billion people that exist now and are living right now, that means that 15 times the amount of people who have lived aren't living now. They've lived before. So my question is, what power does one perfect life have if it's given in death? Jesus, his perfect life, given in death, has the power to save 106,999,999,999 people. You're amongst those people. I'm in those people. His perfect life, Jesus' perfect life, has the power to save every single other life because he fulfilled all of the law. His attitudes, his actions, his decisions, what he did, what he said, where he went, what he was thinking, all of it was perfect. All of it was right. Becoming a Christian and embracing Jesus Christ as Savior and Lord means that we commit ourselves to following him. And that's what our recommitment should be today, is to him, living Jesus Christ in our everyday lives. The second truth is this: recommitment's got to be individualized. Joshua was leading the whole nation, but he knew that it wasn't about him making the decision for Rahab or her family, that everyone was going to have to make the decision themselves. But he was calling attention to the people so that everyone would know that their attitudes and their actions should reflect what the law of Moses said. He wanted everyone to know with certainty how to get to God, but they had to make the individual choice to make that decision. And so do you. I can't make the decision for you to follow Christ. You have to make the decision yourself. And we've made those decisions in our lives with the blessings and the curses, because we can look at our lives, and I know we like to blame other people for the decisions and the mistakes and then the curses and the difficulties that we have in life, but usually when we scratch all the way down to the root, it's me. It's you. And so when I recommitted to Susie 5 years ago on our 25th wedding anniversary, I acknowledged that a lot of the problems in our marriage, in our life, were me. I was to blame. And that's where it starts, with recommitment. I want the blessings. I don't want the curses. And the same is true with you in your life. You've got to take individual responsibility to recommit yourself to following Christ. The third thing is this: a true recommitment is going to involve our daily attitudes and our actions. That's what Joshua was really hoping for, but we know that it didn't take. Just a couple of chapters from now, a couple weeks from now, we're going to take a look at a time when Israel didn't do what God had asked them to do. What did God tell Israel to do? I want you to drive all the Canaanites, all the inhabitants off their land. They are to be nowhere in their land. And is that what Joshua and the Israelites did? Well, Joshua was faithful, but a lot of the Israelites weren't. They chose not to drive the Canaanites out. And for the last 3,000 years, there's been problem after problem after problem. And it goes all the way back to this root decision that they chose not to do what God told them to do. Well, you and I have to subject our actions and our attitudes to that recommitting to Christ. So oftentimes I know we sometimes have to act our way into a feeling, Sometimes I don't feel like praying. Sometimes I don't feel like doing my quiet time. Sometimes I don't feel like eating right or whatever you want to put in that area. But we have to rise up and make the right choice despite how we feel. There are times when we do that. But oftentimes we go after the action without addressing the attitude. And we wonder why we have a short change in our life, why transformation didn't really take, is because we went after the action instead of the attitude. You see, our attitudes are what drives our actions. And so we need to take our attitudes to God and say, you know what, my attitude stinks, God. I've been jealous. I've been disappointed. I've been disagreeable. I've not been thankful. I've, been angry. I've been bitter. I've been all these things. I want you to get rid of all those attitudes. I want to change my actions. I've been miserable around the house. I've been dragging everybody in it. I've been saying things that I shouldn't be saying. I want you to change my attitude, God, so that I can live Jesus Christ. I want to have my words be grace-filled. And it's amazing how when we change our attitude and we become grace-filled, that we lack judging other people. Or when I become thankful, how generous I become. Is because the attitude needs to be changed, and we need to take our attitudes to God. He's in the business of transforming those lives. So how do we do this? How do we bridge the distance between where we are and where we can be when it comes to recommitting? Well, it really depends on what you're recommitting to. And I can't really answer that for you, but I'll give you two examples. One that we used last week, we talked about food. And most of us really like food. Most of us probably like food too much. And so we talked about that, and we talked about it, gave an example of not eating out so much and eating more nutritional meals and setting a 7-day goal if that's the area that you wanted to do that. And hopefully you experienced success and progress this week by some of you gave up sugar. Some of you gave up eating out to eat better and to eat at home more and to be prepared for that. We talked about that. So how is that going? How did that recommitment go? If you fell off the wagon and you started just eating everything in house, because I told you don't eat those ho-hos and don't eat those cupcakes on Sunday afternoon when you're trying to start on Monday, that was the wrong timing. So if you fell off the wagon, what went wrong? What happened? Why did you fail? Why did you not experience success? You need to figure out what went wrong so that you can get back up on the wagon and try again. Set another goal. Trying, though, is for suckers. So I don't want you to try. I want you to do it. I want you to set the 7-day goal. If it relates to food, recommit yourself to your 7-day goal and be all in. The second area is, we got to talk about Jesus a little bit. Recommitting ourselves to Jesus. How is that going for you? Are you following Jesus? Are you following in his footsteps? Are you spending time with him? Are you worshiping him, not just on Sundays? Are you worshiping him during the week? Are you connected in a life group? Are you growing as a disciple? Are you helping other people grow as disciples? How's that going? If it's not going well and you're struggling, why not? What's going on? What's wrong? You need to figure out what's going wrong. Well, maybe because you're not praying every day. Maybe that you're not praying at all. It could be that you're not in God's word at all. It could be that you should be fasting and you're not. You should be addressing some other spiritual discipline in your life, but you have no spiritual discipline. You have no discipline in your life, let alone spiritual discipline. So if you can find what's going wrong, then you can address that and recommit to living the life that God desires for you to live. What if God could count on 200 of us to fully commit to him and live this way? What would it be like in our community if God could count on 2,000 people or 20,000 people or 200,000 people who were sold out, who are fully committed to living Jesus Christ? What I want you to do today is I want to encourage you to recommit to fulfilling the purpose that he has for your life. The purpose that he has for your life is not that you stand up here and that you preach. It's not necessarily that you're teaching a Sunday school class, but he does have a purpose for your life, and I hope and I pray that you know what that is. And maybe this week for you, it's just about recommitting to fulfilling that purpose. Maybe discovering what that purpose is if you don't know what that is. I want to encourage you to recommit to living courageously, boldly, to following Jesus. Recommit to following Jesus. Recommit to being his disciple. Recommit to living the promises and the blessings that God has for you. Understand, there's a choice. There's the Mount Ebal side, and there's the Mount Gerizim side. In our lives, it's not Ebal or Gerizim. It's not mountains. But it's do I choose not to go there, or do I go there? Do I say that, or do I not say that? Do I hang with those relationships and those people, or do I choose different relationships? You see, those are the choices, and they lead down a path of blessing or severe warning. Let's pray.